It's an absolute pleasure to be here this evening and to have the privilege of chairing this Earthwatch lecture and event on meeting the Freshwater Challenge. I've spent quite a few years working on a whole range of different sustainability, environmental, ecological questions. And one of the things that I find really quite surprising is how there is a tendency to take some of the most fundamental benefits we get from nature very much for granted. And there's 3 or 4 headings you might look at in making that observation. One is the productivity of soils and the miracles that go on in recycling nutrients. Another one would be in relation to the replenishment of fresh air, which keeps us all healthy. And then, of course, there is the availability of fresh water. When we take these fundamentals for granted, when it comes to water, I think most of us hardly look even beyond the tap. And if we did think about what lies beyond the tap, we'd be thinking about treatment works, reservoirs, pipes, and pumps to bring that precious liquid into our homes. Rarely do we think about the far, far bigger water utility that lies behind that engineering, which is, of course, nature. Without fresh water and its replenishment, there is no agriculture, there is no industry, there are no cities. And indeed, human well-being would be massively diminished, considering how so much of our health and recreational activities are supported by access to fresh water, boating, fishing, bird watching, swimming, and all the rest, an incalculable economic value being delivered from that set of services. So when you look at this juxtaposition between the fundamental importance of water, the fact that it's being driven in terms of its cycles by natural systems, and the extent to which we're degrading it, it seems to me that a very different approach is required from human societies if we are to rise to the freshwater challenge. And this is not simply something which is an environmental perspective. We were reminded this year by the World Economic Forum, none other, that actually water scarcity and stresses in the water environment is now one of the key global risks in the decades ahead. So what are we going to do in rising to that water challenge and managing the economic and social risks at the same time as improving the quality of the environment? That's what we're going to be hearing about this evening.
So globally, freshwaters are the most threatened part of the natural world. I'm sure you've come across the Living Planet Index, which shows that population of freshwater species have declined by 76%, a much greater decline than species in the marine or terrestrial systems. In the UK, the State of Nature report, which was prepared by a group of NGOs, shows that 2/3 of freshwater species have declined, and 1/3 have strongly declined. So it's not a pretty picture. Of course, in the news, you hear about the otter bouncing back, but there's little or nothing about the glutinous snail, which was once found all across the UK and is found now in one lake in Wales. You don't hear very much either about the freshwater pearl mussel, which is facing global extinction. And we believe plants and animals in freshwaters have an intrinsic value. So these species are basically declining because of pollution. But what about ponds in urban areas? What about ponds in protected areas? We know very little about them. So what are we missing? Well, here's an area of northeast London. You can see the M25 just up here. And you can see in blue what is monitored by the Environment Agency. It's a river. And in red, the circles and the lines show all the ponds, the ditches, and the streams that are not monitored at all. We know very little about them. So the question is really, does it matter? Are these small waters important? Isn't it just enough to look after the big things, the lakes and the rivers? Well, the idea that one large thing is more important than lots of little things is what biologist John Downing, an American biologist, called the saliency error. And in fact, just last year, the US Environmental Protection Agency released a report that really confirmed what we've been saying all along, that these small waters, the ponds, the ditches, and the streams are really essential part of the catchment, of the freshwater landscape. And here's the result of a study we published about 10 years ago. We surveyed all the different water bodies in one catchment: the ponds, the rivers, the lake, the streams, and the ditches. We looked at the plants, we looked at the animal, and we compared between different water body type. And what we find really surprised us, and I think surprised the whole of the freshwater biology community, we found that the ponds supported more plants collectively, more plants and animals collectively, than the larger waters. So really a big surprise. So what can we do to actually protect freshwater biodiversity? Well, we need to know where the important sites for freshwater biodiversity are. We need to be able to protect them. Once we know where they are, we can potentially protect them, but also extend them. And maybe if we can do that, we have a chance to slow the decline in freshwater plants and animals. We also need to know about the extent and the type of pollution. Once we know that, potentially we can find practical solutions to reduce or even eliminate pollution. But of course, when resources are so limited, and getting ever more so, it's very hard to actually gather all this data. And this is why we believe that citizen science has a really important role to play in gathering this data. Okay, so freshwaters and the plants and animals they support are in trouble. I think that's very clear. Citizen scientists have an important role to play in the conservation of those freshwaters. They can produce the data that can help us better understand what's going on and so address the issues. In the longer term, they can also help us get the evidence to potentially influence policy. Of course, the citizen scientists themselves actually benefit from this. They get a better understanding of their local environments. And also, perhaps more importantly, they can directly contribute to the protection of the natural world. Thank you.
Please don't worry if you've never heard of CDP. You're not alone. We were recently branded in the Harvard Business Review as the most influential green NGO that you've probably never heard of. So you're definitely not alone. There are many of you out there. However, the stakeholders that we work with, the large global corporations, large influential investors, and many governments around the world do thankfully know who we are. We are an international not-for-profit organisation. We're based here in London. This is our headquarters, but we have offices all over the world. And we leverage shareholder power, investor power, to motivate action from the world's largest corporations in respect of preventing the destruction of forests, preventing climate change, and preventing the destruction of our natural freshwater resources. And quite excitingly, it's working. So how do we do it? It sounds quite simple, really. On an annual basis, we issue a questionnaire. Not overly exciting, perhaps, for those of you that don't engage with questionnaires, but it serves a range of purposes. The first is to gather information from the corporation about the effects that the depletion of water resources is having on their business. That data is then fed back into the marketplace via Bloomberg terminals, Google Finance, Thomson Reuters, and our own individual data platform, so that the investors can make a more informed decision as to where they put their money and how they spend it. In addition, the questionnaire serves a second purpose. By posing what on the face of it appears to be a relatively simple question, such as, are you exposed to water-related risks that may cause a substantive change in your business? It sparks a response within the company, because for many, these are questions that they've never asked themselves before, given that this is a relatively new topic of interest for them. So when you're confronted with a question such as that from 617 institutional investors, you generally want to know why you're being asked and what the answer is so that you can provide a comprehensive answer. So it sparks conversations that perhaps were never happening before. It encourages companies to seek out data that they perhaps didn't realize was of any use or value to them before. They actually go and find out where their meters are. The water manager suddenly becomes quite an important person within an organization. So it's very exciting. More and more companies are increasingly realizing that the real value of water is not adequately reflected in the price that they pay, but instead resides in business continuity, supply chain resilience, and protecting or enhancing your brand value. I'm going to share with you a couple of examples here of companies that have disclosed information to CDP. It's all in the public domain, about how business is already being affected by water stress and worsening water security. This is a case study from Barrick Gold. rather large gold manufacturer and producer from around the world. They have lots and lots of mining sites. They've had to shelve their Pascua-Lama gold mine. They're no longer extracting or even undertaking any work within the mine to abstract the gold that still remains underground in this case. There were concerns from the Chilean government that the groundwater would be polluted as a result of this project, and therefore they prevented the company from getting the license they needed to withdraw the water that they need to extract the gold. The company had already invested $5 billion in developing the mine, and there's clearly further other billions that still remain underground waiting to be exploited. Another example is from American Electric Power, who are forecasting that new US Environmental Protection Agency regulations regarding the withdrawal requirements needed that AEP need to meet within their coal-fired power stations. Once that's applied to their power stations, of which there are 31 across the US, it could net the company around $1 billion in costs. This is clearly a material issue for many businesses and their investors. But it's not just in direct operations. Of course, Unilever are very concerned about the goods and their ability to sell the goods and services that they produce in water-stressed regions, particularly in developing economies. The use of Unilever and other household products, other manufacturers are available, of course, can account for around 80 to 90% of household water use. And what they're recognizing is that citizens and householders that are located in water-stressed regions are having to make a trade-off and decide how to spend their precious ration of water that they get a day. And that's highly likely to affect the sale of Unilever's products and therefore constrain their growth. On the topic of constraining growth, interestingly, of the global 500 companies that disclosed information to CDP this year, more than almost a quarter reported that water scarcity and water quality issues are likely to constrain their growth, and it's likely to happen within the next 3 years. This isn't a long-term risk. This is very short-term for many of these organizations. Of those, just 184 global 500 corporations that disclosed last year, they combined withdraw 11 billion megalitres of water every single year. That's the equivalent amount of water for 50 litres of water per day for approximately 7 billion people, or everybody on the planet, for nearly 82 years. That's every year. So if we can influence how these companies are using this water, where they're taking it from, how they're putting it back into the system, where they're growing their crops that might also have an impact on this, on water use, what products they're creating that can again have a further impact, it's really quite exciting. Not to mention the fact that these companies employ vast numbers of people, they buy from vast numbers of suppliers, and they serve even greater numbers of citizens. Another example is from Nestlé. Again, recognizing that the depletion of water resources, particularly in Vietnam, was having a detrimental effect on their coffee growers. For Nestlé, Vietnam is a critical supplier of coffee. As a result of this, they clearly didn't want to have to pay too much more money for the coffee that they grow, and also recognize that they have a responsibility to Vietnam and to the water resources and the communities that rely upon those water resources. And so what they've done again is identify key local partners on the ground to ensure that the standard and more efficient approaches to irrigation are adopted as standard practice globally for 50,000 of their farmers. Again, the scale of these activities is really wonderful, and I think collectively, this collective action, if marshalled in the right way, through the likes of CDP, through the likes of Earthwatch and Freshwater Watch, the opportunities are limitless. This is a bit of a jokey slide, I suppose, but this really represents the fact that a lot of organizations and companies in particular are coming very swiftly to the realization that they cannot do this alone. There is very little value in being a clean fish in a dirty pond. Thank you very much.
Now, we've seen tonight that there's lots of challenges, lots of problems, and I can't help but think that the solution to those problems is greater involvement of the people in the communities that live around the water bodies. And that's kind of Earthwatch's presence. Earthwatch has always brought scientists and people together to find solutions to pave the way for a more sustainable future. Freshwater should be an obvious one. We're all biologically, emotionally, historically, economically attached to these ecosystems. And you're lucky in the UK because they're everywhere. Throughout the world, degradation is getting worse. If you look at the studies, algal blooms are increasing. Algal blooms are occurring more frequently and they're lasting longer. Eutrophication is probably the #1 problem for most environment agencies across the globe. General degradation, especially in the developing countries, is common in most water bodies. In some countries, it's not even a discussion of how can we stop eutrophication, it's how can we stop the disappearance of our lakes and streams. Invasive species have taken over a large part of all major rivers and lakes, and also a large part of all the small water bodies that we know very little about. So what can be done? Well, science, being a scientist, science can give us some of the answers. But the problem is that we don't have enough information. There aren't enough scientists, there aren't enough people out there to gather the information, to find out what's going on, to know the conditions of these water bodies. Field research is expensive. It's expensive from the point of view of funding, and there's always less funding. It's expensive from the point of view of people, and as I said, there's not enough scientists out there. And it's expensive from the point of view of time. So I can't be everywhere, but the people who live around these water bodies, the people in the communities where these water bodies are an integral part, the village pond, the mountain stream, they are there, and they have a vested interest in knowing what's going on. Earthwatch created the Freshwater Watch exactly to do this, to bring citizens and scientists together. And it's interesting because we're doing this in 30 urban areas across the globe on 4 continents, so we're doing this in 5 languages, and trying to do it in 5 languages is anything but easy. And we're seeing some really interesting things. We have thousands of citizen scientists, 4,000 active citizen scientists now, who are gathering data across the globe using the same methodology to look at ecosystem conditions, to look at water quality, to look at land use. All this information is being used by a team of 25 research scientists from 20 different institutes in each part of the globe to find out local solutions, but also to examine global comparisons and come up with some global solutions. Where are the clean water bodies? Where are the degraded water bodies? What can we do to reduce the degradation? Just a little bit of the information that's come up. This is a graph of nitrate concentrations. So nitrate concentrations, nitrate is a nutrient that's one of the main nutrients that causes eutrophication. It's often associated with agricultural pollution. It's not just agricultural pollution, but it's often associated with it. So globally, wherever you go, in Latin America, Asia, the Middle East, North America, the concentration of nitrates in still water bodies is lower than it is in moving water bodies. And that red line is where we don't want to go above. So if we're in Europe, we're gone, in talking about a stream or river, we've gone way above it. If we're in North America, the situation isn't quite as dramatic. Of course, this is not a characterization of rivers in North America and rivers in Europe. This is a characterization of where our citizen scientists are working. So in the cities, in the urban areas where we're working, this is the situation. But not only can citizen scientists give us an idea of where are the clean water bodies, what are the general conditions, but they're able to give us some indication on what are the drivers of this degradation. Now you can imagine what the drivers might be. If this was a classroom, I would quiz you and ask you what you think of the drivers, but it's not a classroom, and Sue will get angry if I do. So what could the drivers be? Well, certainly climate, variability in climate is going to have an impact. Land use, land management, water management, what kind of wastewater treatment there are. One very obvious thing to look at is population density. So how many people live in the catchment where these measurements are being made? As you can see, there's a clear trend. More people means more, in this case, the graph on the left is phosphate concentrations. Again, red line. If we can stay below the red, once we go above the red line, that's a threshold where biological impairment is likely to occur. So for phosphate concentrations on the left, again, nitrate concentrations on the right. We're not just looking at phosphate and nitrate, but they're the neatest graphs that I can show you. We're also looking at turbidity, which the particulate concentrations. We're looking at the incidence of algal blooms. We're looking at the bank vegetation. But just looking at this here, notice that the red line for the phosphate concentrations, as soon as we get above around 2,000 people per square kilometer, we start to have a large part of the water bodies that we're looking at are going into the degraded state. They've gone above that threshold. If we look at nitrate concentrations, that threshold is passed much earlier. So even at 700 or 800 people per square kilometer, across the globe in 30 cities, 6,000 data points, 1,500 water bodies, we're seeing a large number of these water bodies in a degraded state. But of course, the whole thing, the whole program is based around the citizen scientists. And we're lucky enough today to have one who we're going to drag up here and make him say something. Jamie Streetfield was trained last year as a citizen scientist. Since that time, he's taken responsibility for 2 ecosystems, 2 water bodies near where he lives. He's taken regular measurements, and those regular measurements are giving us real insights into this kind of water body.
Thank you, Steve. Good evening, everyone. My name's Jamie Streetfield, and I work in marketing for HSBC. I've been a citizen science leader now for just over a year, and it feels great to be part of a big global program. A lot of people ask me, why did I decide to become a citizen science leader? My first thought on this was, it's just an exciting opportunity to become a scientist. I've always loved the outdoors. I love fresh air, in particular being close to water. So I thought, what better way to enjoy all those elements while conducting vital research as well for the programme. I attended one of the training days at Wimbledon Common and was blown away with a lot of the startling facts that I learned. These really hit me hard. I decided then and there I'd definitely make some lifestyle changes. These included drinking less coffee, eating less red meat, turning taps off while brushing teeth, taking shorter showers. Small things, but things, if we all did, would add up to quite a big thing. On the day we went out into the field and we tested 2 different water bodies. One was a free-flowing, clean-looking river, and the other was a very dark, green-looking, algae-ridden pond. The actual results were astounding because the river turned out to be quite polluted, whereas the pond was remarkably clean. So it struck me that what you actually see is not always what you actually get at the end of it. I really enjoy the testing, and I take friends out whenever I can to show them what I'm actually doing so they can understand it, rather than me just talking about it. Also end up chatting to various people while I'm testing, who always come up to you and wonder what I'm doing. They're taking water out of their local pond. It always ends up in some interesting conversations. I regularly talk to colleagues, family, friends about what I do, encourage them to get involved wherever possible, because as we've said, we need more people. More people means more results. Using my influence within the bank and demonstrating my passion, I've managed to encourage about 20 new citizen science leaders, quite a few from my own marketing team, which is great. As well as discussing this topic in team meetings and various ad hoc chats, I also arranged a big lunch and learn session for the whole marketing function. Lots of presentations and questions, and again, lots of people were really interested in this and have since signed up to either do their training or to do training in the future. I'm certainly going to continue to test my water bodies, and I might even add another 1 or 2 to mine. And I'd always encourage others to get in the programme whenever possible. I really hope this has been of interest. I'd just like to finish by saying it'd be great if we could get some new citizen science leaders from the audience tonight after you've heard this. It really is good fun. As I said, get more people involved, get your children involved maybe. It's great fun, and it's all obviously for a wonderful cause. Thank you very much.
So where do citizen scientists come from? They're born from women just like everyone else. No. Citizen scientists come from communities. Communities that are interested in what's going on around them. Communities that feel that they can make a difference by joining and supporting science and working together. And this working together to find solutions. They come from companies, as we see, where people and companies are interested in getting their employees to be leaders in the local community, or they're interested in making sure that the environment on which they depend continues to be in a decent state or improves. They come from universities and schools, where professors and teachers are training the next generation of scientists, lots of scientists, but also decision makers. So they're coming from all these different places, but they're all interested in knowing more, understanding more, making changes. In conclusion, I would like to say, get involved.
Thanks very much. So we are now going to open the floor for a few questions and discussion with the panel.
Is time enough to improve the quality of the rivers and streams? Can the nitrate content be reduced by simply leaving it alone? And if it can be accelerated by positive action, how quick can that happen?
So the question is, if I understood properly, does nitrate go away when you stop? Okay, well, we don't know because we're not there yet. We've not stopped the source of nitrate. But no, I'm being flippant. It really depends on the water body, and it really depends whether it's groundwater or whether it's surface water. So, of course, if it's flowing, if you stop the source, it's going to go away. If it's a standing water body, well, it all depends on the actual water body itself and biological interactions, of course. But the worst thing really is in groundwater, because you can stay there for a very, very long time. And in fact, the level of nitrates that are being applied has actually decreased overall, yes. But we're not seeing a decrease in what's coming out of the groundwater. So, yes, but we don't know how long it's going to take before the system can clean up. And there's still enough being applied that we can still detect it in the surface water as well.
Right at the back there, thank you, in the middle.
It's great if big businesses and big industries are coming on board about protecting water, but one just feels slightly cynical that they're doing it with their own interest at heart. And I suppose it's how much of that, given that they probably pollute a lot of the water anyway, how much of that actually filters down to the poorest people and the local villages and so on?
I speak for my own organisation and CDP and how we work to provide these accountability frameworks to ensure that the actions that companies are taking are, that the profit motive of the companies does not trump the environmental or the social benefits that may accrue from the actions. We have these companies disclose information to their shareholders via CDP publicly. The data that they're disclosing to us demonstrates that there are a range of risks that the companies are identifying, and they fit quite nicely into three buckets. The physical risk, there are regulatory risks, but the final bucket, that again is a substantial bucket, is reputational risk. This is the idea that there is either the reality or the perception amongst the communities that these companies operate within, buy from, or sell to, that they are not doing what they need to do to protect the resource that they are lending from the community and the environment that they depend upon. I agree that we should not be naive in thinking that businesses will be doing this because it's out of the goodness of their heart, but equally I think that the profit motive and the business reality of the fact that their businesses will not be able to succeed if they don't take appropriate and meaningful action can be harnessed and used to meet the freshwater challenge.
We've had some great interaction on Twitter tonight, probably for our scientists, around how you check the robustness of data gathered by citizen scientists.
Firstly, all the data is quality control. So every time Jamie uploads a data point, in that moment, there's a model that will check the different data that he's uploading. And I didn't tell him before, but if he does upload something that's wrong, that'll kick the data back to him. These kind of self-checks within the system that we've created are there to check the quality of the data being uploaded. Then we have a manual quality control that every week we go through all the data that's been uploaded across the planet and see if it's consistent with what we expect. And then we have all our 25 different colleagues like Pascal, who's checking the data by making side-by-side measurements with laboratory grade. We're certainly not going to say that the nearly 7,000 data sets are of the same quality as if they were taken by individual scientists, but it would take individual scientists 10 years to get those 7,000 data points. The little price we pay in quality is made up by quantity.
So I certainly feel as though I've learned a great deal this evening, and a reminder that this is indeed a series, and if you'd like to come to the next Earthwatch event, it's on the evening of the 14th of May, and it will be called Turning the Tide, Coastal Communities and Conservation, and I'm sure that'll be another fascinating event. We've finished pretty much on time. I'm told the bar is out this way and round the back. I shall see you there. Thank you very much indeed.